I appreciate that when people come to UT from other institutions and tell us how to make UT work, and first thing I think is, what do you know about UT? That when I go places like the state of North Carolina and tell you how we do things in Texas, there should be some substantial eye roll, not necessarily because what I have to offer up isn't a spectacular bit of advice, but because everything is very different everywhere. So on some level, I have to frame what it is that makes Texas what Texas is, and in that context, tell you why we're doing what we're doing. But I also know that when it's all said and done, I've got to have some takeaway messages for you. So I've got a couple of takeaway messages that I'll start to develop in about 5 minutes after I've told you what UT Austin is. UT Austin is a public flagship institution that aspires to be the best public flagship institution in the country, and it does it while at the same time realizing that lots of people have a very different understanding of what that means, especially when it comes to what we do and how we fund. Our president, a few years ago, had some interesting conversations with people like the governor of the state and the legislature and our regents, and they were questioning the efficiencies that existed on our college campus. And specifically, it was put in the context of whether our students were successful. And the definition of success came down to this notion of whether they graduated, and not just graduated, but graduated in 4 years. So they had this kind of name that tune sort of thing where I can graduate them in 5 years. Now I can graduate them in 4 years. And when it was all done, they arrived on a particular outcome that he agreed we would make an institutional priority. And that outcome was that we were going to achieve 70% four-year graduation rates. At the time, we were 51% four-year graduation rates and had been somewhat static for some period of time. One of the primary reasons why we were static at 51% was because there were no particular rules to suggest students needed to graduate. And if you haven't been there, Austin's a great place. Just go and stay. Since our faculty believe you should stay on campus for life, why shouldn't our students? And that was an attitude that both the students and the faculty shared, so that when I was made the champion of four-year graduation rates, people threw stuff at me. I still walk across campus and have people say, are you still doing that four-year thing? Because they don't fundamentally buy into it. Now, that said, it was supposed to be a real thing. It was legitimate. I was brought into the provost office. I'd been the student dean in natural sciences, and I was told to achieve 70% four-year graduation rates overnight. And by that I mean the incoming class in the year 2013 had to graduate in 2017 at 70%. Now I don't know what they were going to do if we didn't make it. I mean, it's not like firing squad or stuff like that, but that was the intention. Now to help make that happen, there was the value that came because the regents decided that they would give us one of our few tuition increases in some time, and every last bit of it had to go to student success, and specifically four-year graduation rates. So I got approximately the only new money for quite some time at UT Austin, about $3.9 million recurring, and I was told to take that and make it so. So that's sort of the frame in that context. Now let me tell you something else that's really interesting about the institution. We don't control our admissions. The Supreme Court controls our admissions. The legislature controls our admissions. The people of the state of Texas control our admissions. We don't get to line up our 50,000 applicants and take the ones we want. And so I'm not going to go into the details of why it is that we have top 10% legislation and SB 175 legislation, and the Fisher case is going to be resolved maybe this summer, and all the outcomes in the next biennium of legislation. But I run admissions at UT, and I know that every year when I wake up, it is different than the year before. So, what is it right now at UT Austin? Because we have top 10% legislation, it means that if you're graduating, and the numbers vary because of some variations in the law, somewhere between the top 7 and top 8% get to go to UT, from any high school in the state, and then we end up with the most amazingly flat distribution of SAT scores. So our top quartile students have an average SAT above 1,500 on a 2-score test, and our bottom quartile have below 1,000 on that. So this is what we get. And then I was hired to do four-year graduation. So when it was time to look at this and ask where we were supposed to put our resources, it was pretty evident to me that the students who had 1,500 plus SATs in the Macomb School of Business and were already graduating with 73% four-year graduation rates didn't need any of my $3.9 million, or not quite as much. So disproportionately, it went in a direction that I thought it should go. And that direction was easy to figure out. I looked at the historical data for every student coming into our institution. And when I say I mean I asked people to look at it. In fact, you should know that I don't actually do anything other than tell people to do stuff. It is so great. So let's get that clear. All right, I decided to look at the historical four-year graduation rates for all of the students coming into UT. And so every one of them gets that label, 82% likely to graduate, 37% likely to graduate, and we went from there. And what I decided was that the group that I was going to work with were the bottom quartile as defined by least likely to graduate in 4 years. These students were somewhere in the typically 20 to 40% range as opposed to the 60 to 90% range. So this is where I offer up some of our best practices models. And the first one I'm going to offer up goes back to something that I saw in 1999 when the top 10% legislation hit. I am a chemistry professor and an administrator, and I still teach large section chemistry courses. So I'm teaching 2 500-student section courses this fall, and I get to see who my students are, and I have to appreciate what it's going to take for them to be successful. Well, in 1999, I started to see the darndest thing. I started to see that the bell curve for grades inverted. I had lots of A's and B's, and I had lots of D's and F's, and nobody got C's. Well, that's sort of an exaggeration, but the idea was there were plenty of students who could master chemistry, and then there were increasing numbers of students who could not pass chemistry. Those students turned out to be students where I didn't have the data at the time, but I saw in there that there were these adversity indicators. They were Pell Grant eligible, they were first-generation students. So I ended up creating a program, it was called the Texas Interdisciplinary Plan, in which if you had 2 adversity indicators, you got into the program. That program is now in place for the bottom 500 of the 2,000 students coming into natural sciences. And what do we do for them? What we do for them is what I call the kitchen sink approach to support, because I'm not an educational psychologist or a person who does research on education. I'm a chemist and an administrator. But I do think common sense matters, so it occurs to me that if you put students in smaller courses and you supplement and you mentor and you advise and you create community, that things ought to get better. And as a matter of fact, in doing so, and specifically doing so in the freshman year, I was interested in seeing what this would do to students whose SAT difference was several hundred between them and the norm. And what I found was something pretty remarkable. I took, in that initial cohort of 50 students, that population, and we talked about them every Monday morning and how they were doing. How's Fahid doing? How's Veronica doing? And if they weren't doing well, either on an academic or on a personal level, we stepped in. 4 years later, they graduated with double the 4-year graduation rate of the rest of the college. We were pretty terrible at the time on a college level for everybody, down around 30%. And this was over 60% for that group. And at that point, I recognized there were 2 things that were real. If you treat that group of students with respect, we never remediated, we never isolated, we joined. Yes, we made darn sure they got lots of extra help. And yes, every time they made a misstep, we stepped in. But for somewhere between $500 and $1,000 in that first year, which was the typical cost for that for that program per student, we got the numbers way up. When I came into the provost office, I decided we were going to do this across the board for the bottom quartile with respect to 4-year graduation rates. And so now between 1,500 and 2,000 students in our incoming class at UT Austin are put into a success program. Success programs in natural sciences, success programs in liberal arts and undergraduate studies. The Division of Diversity and Community Engagement runs a large one. They all operate with this, what I call best practices, although we've done no research on it, notion of kitchen sink. That you do small class, you do community, you do supplement, you do mentoring, you do advising, and darned if we don't see a difference. I mean, it's profound. The great thing about that is that first year, offers an amazing ability to overcome that 200-point difference in SAT that's real. When I first came into the provost office, the first-year persistence rate for that student population was about 83%. For the overall institution, it was 95%. In other words, that bottom quartile was 12 percentage points or so less likely to return the next year. And you would have thought, well, that makes sense. Their SAT is 200 or 300 points lower. Over the last 4 years of implementing this, that student success persistence has gone up to 93%. Now, we've closed the gaps. And that bottom quartile is very close to the top quartile in terms of likelihood of continuing on at the university. I can't stress enough how much this means to me as one of those bottom quartile students myself. I got lousy SATs. I came from a home that didn't exactly know what college was all about, and I had an enormous difficulty adjusting to what college was. I got my C in the course I now teach, and spent most of my time thinking about how much I couldn't wait to get home to my community college and get away from that place. And yet, look what happens if you put that kind of effort into that first year. And after that, they're off. There's another population that I wanted to work with. I found myself in charge of financial aid as well, and I'd always been bothered by financial aid because financial aid is this thing that says, here's this money, young men and women, do what you want with it, and now let's get on with things. Well, for a lot of these students, having all that money on the front end is not the greatest idea, especially when they come from families in need themselves. So I wanted to create a different structure that recognized what the situation was for that neediest population of students, because I could line up my Excel spreadsheets and put in least likely to graduate and most economically disadvantaged, and I'd have my bottom students, my 500 bottom students. Those were the kinds of students who viewed UT, I joke with them about this, they view UT Austin as a study abroad experience. Yes, they come from the state of Texas, but Austin is not in the state of Texas. And so they live as far away from the institution as they can. They show up to engage in a transaction called take a course, and then they leave. Those students have persistence rates that were in the 60% level after 1 year. So I created the University Leadership Network, and I told the students I would give them their money, but in exchange, they had to become part of the university. They became part of the university through internships, through service learning, through leadership training, through the development of a professionalism in what they did. And it's amazing. Every year, 500 more students enter the program. Next year, we will be at a point where there are 2,000 students in that program, all of them identified by metrics as being the least likely to be successful, and that they're walking around campus now like they own the place. You have a student who wanted to be an accountant who shows up, well, darn it, they're interning in an accountant's office on campus. You have a student who wants to be a scientist, well, they're interning in a research professor's laboratory. Not surprisingly, because they now stay on campus and feel like they can walk into any door they want, they're more likely to study on campus and thrive on campus. That population typically has success measures of 30% four-year graduation rate. We're on track for that group to graduate at 65 to 70% four-year graduation rate. A remarkable change, not just because of the academic piece of it, but because of that sense of belonging, that sense of wellness in being on campus. I'm going to shift gears for a moment to talk about my favorite subject, which is the faculty. I am one, and I have taught as a faculty member for a great deal of time and quite enjoyed it. I want you to know that when I was first hired to be a faculty member, I had no idea what I was supposed to do when I taught. I came to realize later that I could either teach incredibly well or badly in class and still develop a bell curve in which I identified the best students in my class. And nobody tried to change this for me. Nobody tried to make it any differently. And so even when I was developing four-year graduation rate plans, I was teaching as if I could shed the bottom quartile students in my class and it was no big deal until I had this rocket science realization that if the bottom quartile of every STEM course, of every gateway course was not being passed, it was mathematically impossible for me to get four-year graduation rates. So I realized that I was my own worst enemy. Now, I say this, I'd actually started to change over time and realize this about myself, But increasingly, we had to have this understanding that you can't simply decide to lop off the bottom quartile just because. Now, one of the things about data that's so amazing, and I point this out in lots of my talks, is I'll point to one individual and I say, you turn out to be the smartest student in class, and I know that before you show up. I got all the data. And you, over there. So does it make any sense that 3 weeks later, I roll out a test in which I prove that you're going to get the A and that you're going to get the F? That's laziness at the highest level. What about if I do something so that you have an opportunity to thrive, to be successful? It does lots of people good. It does good for you, and I make my 70% four-year graduation rates. That meant, though, changing the faculty. And a lot of the things that we're doing on campus right now are trying to re-engage the faculty as departments so that we're not picking on them as individuals, but asking them as departments to think about reconsidering how they do their gateway courses. The results have been pretty remarkable. I can tell you right now that in biology, the non-passing rates have been dropped fourfold, from near 30% down to 6% in just a few years. Chemistry rates have gone from around 18% down to around 7 or 8% in 3 years. Government, history, their non-passing rates have been cut in half. I don't have time to talk about the detail of it, but I can tell you that a lot of it has to do with reframing pedagogically how it is that they approach their teaching. They take advantage of technology, they take advantage of collaborative learning environments. The students study more, they study better, they get better grades, and get this, they're told it's okay to give students good grades for getting good grades on tests. We don't worry, I hope, about the dreaded notion of grade inflation, which is a nice proxy for lazy teaching. So, as a result of that, combining those two sorts of things, we end up seeing thriving happening among our student population, and it's a great thing to see. 2 points before I finish up, just sort of, ways of viewing the world. Here's one. I am a professor, and that means I went through college to get a degree, I went through graduate school to get a PhD, and I went through the tenure process. 2 of them were a piece of cake. And the reason they were a piece of cake for me was because they had a very nice way of managing my insertion into the process. So when I was trying to become a tenured professor and I didn't get my first NSF and NIH grants funded, my department chairman took me out to lunch and told me that's the way it was supposed to be. But don't worry, it would work out. When I was in graduate school and I failed at my first research experiments, my research director took me out for a beer and told me that's okay, that's the way it's supposed to be. In both cases, 4 or 5 years later, I had my credential, I had my job for life. When I was in college and I failed my first calculus test, there wasn't anybody around to tell me that it was going to be okay. There were people around to tell me that I didn't belong, and in particular, if I come from a disenfranchised group, if I come from a group that does not believe that higher education is ever going to do me any good, then who am I going to listen to? My parents saying, see, I told you so? Or somebody who's supposed to be there to help pick it up? So just pointing out that little bit of hypocrisy in how we approach higher education. And wonder why it is that we can't imagine a 4-year environment for our students in which that early immersion and an early low-stakes introduction isn't such a bad thing, if in the end what we want on the back end of it is the opportunity for all those students to be successful. One final bit of threat that I offer up is this. And this isn't threat from me, this is threat from the way the world is made. I always tell this story about the people who make gaming consoles. I bought one for my kids, maybe it was a PlayStation. I'm a bad parent, I bought him Halo 3, a nice first-person shooter. And so my 15-year-old son, my 11-year-old son, my 7-year-old son, they all start playing the game. My 15-year-old beats it in 2 days, my 11-year-old beats it in 2 weeks, my 7-year-old beats it in a year. But they all beat it. You know why? Because someone wants to sell me Halo 4. And if I don't make it possible for my 7-year-old to make it, he's not going to buy Halo 4. The same sort of thing exists in higher education. And in the old days, I think we used to own locally all responsibility for this. There were no threats about it. We were the only game in town. Now there are people out there using technology to provide that alternative, and we don't have to like it. We can look at it and say the people who do adaptive interactive teaching online and those for-profit universities and all of that happening up there in the cloud, that's not nearly as good as us. Except what is it that we're offering? It better be success for our students. It better be A's in the courses. It better be the ability to graduate, or they're going to end up turning elsewhere. Which is sort of an interesting thing, because now it makes me wonder about what my job is as a faculty member. I don't need to teach content anymore. In fact, I spend most of my time in my classrooms facilitating and motivating, telling my students, you can make it, you can get an A, you can be successful. Because the content's already online. I already put that up there, and they can look at that 24/7. I think that that's ultimately the future for all of our faculty, most of whom would probably dread the notion that they had to spend the rest of their lives doing PowerPoint slides. Notice I'm not showing PowerPoint slides. And instead would rather be in the laboratory or in the libraries, where perhaps they could be leading their students through experiences, serving in apprenticing models as they developed into the kind of people that we want to be. For me, that's what the future residential campus looks like. It's not a place where I talk at you. It's a place where I embrace you, undergraduates, graduates, peers, in that process of learning. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few panelists joining us. To reset, I'm Kelly McCullen, director of the North Carolina Channel. It's part of the UNC TV network. And as it goes, I'm a member of your greater family and team here. Don't forget that. We're here to serve you. We're here to cover events such as this. And inevitably, we always learn when we're at these events. Thank you for joining us, panel. Dr. Laude, thank you for your comments. I will start with you. Everyone catches their breath. As a professor or someone who does have to talk at a class, sometimes large ones, how much can you take on intellectually? If you take a quarter of your class and you work in depth with them, you've got to hear about their problems, their past, their presents. How much of that can you really take on and still stay focused on what your core job is, which is to prepare these students to be successful?
I think that a lot of this is about the parallel work that's done not just by me, but by what technology enables and what my students are able to do for each other. This becomes this collective learning community that exists where it isn't just all about me one-on-one trying to connect to a student either personally or in terms of their content development. There's a lot I can do motivating a class of 500 people who walk in there, having me do everything I can to say, go study really hard, and here are the tools to do it, and have them go out and do it. But mostly, it's about, now that I have those students out there doing it, they're working with each other to achieve that success. There's a test I'm giving tonight in chemistry. Last night, I guarantee you that over in the collaborative learning spaces in the library, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students were lying on the floor with each other, studying to be successful. This is a transition in the way students approach learning, where it's not all about me and them, it's about the collective that I create.
Moving down the panel, we will discuss best practices, what's working on campuses in the UNC system as well as the University of Texas at Austin. Pull those microphones nice and close so everyone, even in the farthest reaches of the room, can hear you. They do a pretty good job, but they still need a voice to apply to them to make them work well. Dr. Patrick Madson's from UNC Charlotte. He's a director of the University Career Center. Your pride and joy appears to be the University Professional Internship Program. Am I right about that? That's what my notes told me.
Definitely. I think for the university, this was started about 3 years ago. And as the gentleman this morning mentioned, starting from that vision point, Gallup and Purdue did some research a couple years ago. And what they said was students who had an internship, they had a mentor, and a significant project while in college were 3 times more likely to succeed after college. That's powerful. So can you imagine all the students that work on campus, federal work study, regular student working positions, and all the internships, graduate students on campus, what if they all went through a formal program to get professional development through the Career Center, those branding initiatives? What if they secured a mentor on campus? What if all of those positions showed students those transferable skills, showed them what they could be getting and how they can leverage that to the next step? That's the vision. And I think 3 years ago, Provost Joan Laude saw this and started the process by strategically funding a program to develop more internships on campus for students. Structured internships instead of just answering the phone, but really getting in there and showing them, here's what the real world is about. Here are the skills that you're going to be gaining. And by the way, you have a formal professional development program that's going to show you how to brand yourself and leverage those toward the next step. So it is our pride and joy.
What makes a good mentor? Because millions of people work, but not all of us are very good, especially dealing with millennials these days, because we speak Latin, they speak Greek.
Comes down to caring. And so there is a difference between a supervisor and a mentor. And some of the UPIP mentors are in the crowd right now. The mentors are those who are going to sit down and coach the students. They're going to sit down and say, what are you about? What are your strengths? Not your weaknesses, but what are your strengths? And what does that mean for those next steps? And oh, by the way, those projects you're working on with me, they're high valued for this university. We value the work that you're doing because it adds something new to our department, our program, our research. And that caring, that connection, that's what students want. They want to know, hey, I'm doing all of this stuff. Why does it matter? What am I going to do with that? And that's what a good mentor does. And so we have people that actually train these people on how to be these types of mentors.
Dr. Carrie McLean's with North Carolina State University. Strategic thinking, you're very good at it, I hear.
Oh, really?
And enhancing the academic advising experience. Broad topic there. Strategic thinking can be intimidating or it can be enlightening. Take us on the enlightening side.
Well, and when I say strategic, I just mean that we have to think about students in a very different way. Higher education, if I had the time, I talked to you all a lot about the history of higher education, how it was created, and kind of how we've learned to function. And we've been talking a lot about change in higher education and transformation. We hear ourselves saying that, but we really, is it not on? We really have to pay attention to what that means. And change management is huge for higher education. And everything that we do is understanding how to manage the change. Because when we don't, we lose students in the process. And so thinking outside those traditional lines that were set up and infrastructure that was built in higher education, because I think it's dysfunctional for us now where we are. And we really do have to learn to work together with each other differently across all those infrastructure lines. And so what I wanted to share with you was actually an initiative that we did at NC State. And basically, we did the initiative because we had limited resources. My experience is working with first-year students who were undeclared, undecided, or students who knew they were undecided, and then working also with students in transition. And we wanted to find a way to connect those students with careers in an experiential way and in a relevant way. They had to, the first part of a course that they take, we teach a 2-semester course, 1 credit hour. We do a lot about career, major exploration, transition to college, because we want to make sure we keep them. We have small sections, very hands-on. But the initiative that I want to talk about is one of the programs that happens in the second part of the class called Career Connections. Now, we have always talked about parents as helicopters. And I'd spent a lot of time talking to parents, and then I decided that they could be helicopters, or we could take that resource and use it to move students forward. And so what I started to talk to parents about was parents as partners, and helping parents to figure out how to engage with students in a way that was developmental for the students, but also developmental for the parents. And so we had parents, we talked to our parents as partners. We spent the time to build web pages and to tweet out information to parents, because we found out that what they needed was really to know what was going on and to know how to ask questions of their students. That's a good thing because we have a broad array of students, and I think a lot of times we assume that because students are first gen, that those are the only students or parents who need additional education about college. But what we found out is that all students were at risk in some kind of a way, and that there were some students who had parents who had really wholesome and healthy careers who didn't know a thing about what their parents were doing every day. And so we decided to work with parents. They volunteered. We had a sign-up process. And I had the opportunity to have an idea and to get some really committed people to do the work. and they talk to parents, set up spreadsheets. Parents volunteered to come in. So our Career Connections event is on a Saturday morning, which the students hate us for. We bring all the students it's mandatory part of their course. We invite parents to come in as partners. We have career professionals, corporate professionals. They actually come in and sit on panels and talk about actually the work that they do every day. Sometimes they tell students that, I work 60 hours a week, and the students leave going, I thought I wanted to do that, but I don't really want to do that. And so they learn all kinds of things about the day-to-day of the career that they think they want to be in. And it's very beneficial. We also assess the experience. The parents sit on the panel. They talk about lots of different kinds of things. They talk about those soft skills that we're talking about and what that actually means in a day-to-day environment. And so we've been trying to build those skills in the first part of the class, so it sort of culminates the experience they have, because they have to have those skills, but they also have to network. That's why it's called Career Connections. And many times those students leave, our students leave with internships, or they will interview folk later, people that they met at the event, and we've been very fortunate to have our students get internships from the professionals or parents on the panel, but also a residual was that, and I hate to say this because my boss is in the audience, but there's a pot of discretionary money that we have that we would never have access to had we not taken the opportunity to work across those lines and partner with parents. And we have faculty on the panels, and just, it's a very non-traditional approach to career development for students, but to get them what they need to be successful, not just while they're here in college, but when they leave college. So that's been a value. And if I had to highlight one thing relative to strategic thinking, I don't know if it's so much strategic as it is to talk about partnerships and collaboration, and doing that in a way that we have never done it before, and really thinking outside the box. We need all of us. There's enough work for every one of us to do, but we need to employ ourselves efficiently so that we're focused and not having students slide in the cracks in between what are our traditional silos in our infrastructure.
At your event you hold, the career event that's mandatory, how do you balance being inspirational with telling it like it is? After you graduate, you get up, you go to work, you pay bills, and you work long hours. How do you balance that out when some of these students really need that inspiration to keep going to be successful?
Absolutely. So we have the privilege of having an orientation course that is taught by the student's academic advisor. We have a proactive advising model where we front load a lot of information. Nobody stays in our program over a year and a half if they're not committed to hands-on student work. And so there's a lot of work that goes all along from the day they walk onto campus. We have the privilege of knowing who they are, of knowing their names, and we talk to them. We have a course that we deliver lots of messages of, and it's intentionally structured so that there's opportunities to build team building skills and conflict resolution. And so we get to know them really well. When you do that, you can say what you need to say to a student, and they'll receive it. You can't say it any kind of way if you don't know the student and if they don't know that you care about them. Someone mentioned earlier the importance of having students care, and I think that's the key piece, is they know we care, they know we have their best interests at heart, and then we make sure that they move in a direction that they paid us to bring them to. So,
Dr. Ontario Wooden, Associate Vice Chancellor, you're about innovation, you're about engagement, global education in North Carolina Central. Oh boy, where do you begin? What's happening on campus? You've got 3 different angles you can bring to us. What's successful in Durham?
Well, this is the second time that I've had the opportunity to sit on a panel with Carrie, and she talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. So I guess I have to be fast on my feet here. Actually, so that's my current title, but I wanted to spend some time talking about the work that Dr. Leach and Dr. Hood and Dr. Shum and Mr. Moultrie do back there in the back. So I had the pleasure of serving as the Dean of the University College before taking this role, and as most of my partners in this room know, We created a university college a few years ago at NCCU, and so I had the task of hiring a strong team of folks, about 40 people, because we decided that we were going to pull all of our first and our second year students together. We were going to provide them with full-time professional advisors. And so we were telling faculty, you know, focus on your juniors and seniors. We're going to hire a professional team of folks to support our first and our second year students. So we were very intentional in the folks that we hired in building the team. I later had the opportunity, after serving as associate dean, to become the dean. And when I became the dean, I think our cohort retention rate was about 69%. And fortunately for us, I think the retention and graduation report just came out, and we're at about 80%. We're at 80%, which had been a goal of ours for a couple of years. And so the career advising and support that was talked about earlier, the professional development that was talked about earlier, was a part of our plan. But one of the things that was important to me was that, you know, faculty and staff be engaged, that they be involved, and that they pay attention to what's going on. So when our students come to orientation, the dean of the university college and their team speaks with the parents at each of the orientation sessions to be clear about what we expect from our students and to be clear about what we expect from the parents. We have that same conversation with students. Our students sign a contract with us related to expectations in their first year on campus. We require that they take 15 hours a semester to keep them moving forward. And so that has helped us to make that gain in the retention standings. You know, high impact practices matter. So the learning communities, the service learning, all of our students are required to complete 120 hours of service before they graduate from NCCU, another means of keeping them engaged in the process. While we were doing all of this with our students and with our professional staff, we asked our faculty members to become a part of learning communities. We created a learning community in our mathematics area to revision and refocus some of our first year general education courses. We asked faculty members to participate in the learning community in our modern foreign language courses, and actually were able to reduce what had become students taking 3 courses in an area to 1 course in an area. We asked, or from 3 courses to 2 courses. In addition, our math faculty came back around and said, you know, we're expecting our liberal arts majors to do some things in the math area that really aren't necessary for them to be successful in their roles. And so there was a shift in our math requirement for our students as well. At the same time, reminding ourselves constantly that context and culture matters. As a historically black university, we have a large number of students who are first generation students, who are low income students. And so sometimes we have to continue to help them to understand why it's important to get that credential, because there's no one back at home who has that credential. And when I reach a tough spot, I can't call home and talk to mom about this because she hadn't had that experience. And so the team of 16, 20, 21 professional advisors that they have in University College are available to support those students. Those students are reached out to after their first 4 weeks on campus with grade updates. They are reached out to after 8 weeks on campus with grade updates. And I'm new school and old school enough. I actually required that we mail letters out to students' permanent address after 8 weeks to update them on their standing, because one of the things that we don't have conversations about now is I didn't know. Because of what happens in orientation, because of what happens when you meet with your academic advisor, because of the communication both through still hard letters and we have an electronic portal, Grades First, that we use for our advising appointments and academic support appointments. We don't deal a lot in the don't know. And so now that we've made the gains that we've made as far as retention, we are also starting to see the gains in the cohort, in the graduation cohort rate moving forward. And so we have some work to do there. We're headed in that direction, and we're committed to doing that.
Dr. Wooden got a question to follow up on the idea that a student hits a rough spot and they call home and they don't get support. It's hard to be a first-generation student who doesn't have the support to go to college, but yet the parents are there to support them to go to NC Central in this case.
Right.
But they hit a rough spot and they call home, and that same parent who got them there
Yeah.
says, "You can't do it."
Well,
Is that what happens?
Their parents don't tell them that they can't do it. The rough spot is if I'm taking the chemistry course that you talked about earlier, and they call home to their parent to talk about that chemistry course, then it's a, I think this is the popular line, baby, we gonna pray about that. And that's one of those cultural things that you have to understand. So parents aren't gonna tell you not to do it. We need to pray on that, but we also need to take advantage of the resources. At the same time, though, as our provost mentioned earlier, an inordinate number of our students work, and I mean work full-time. And so when you talk about taking 15 hours, reaching a tough spot academically, working full-time to not only take care of yourself on campus, but a number of our students actually send resources back home to take care of home, it's a lot to balance. And so having those professional advisors and having those professional counselors available to students in their first 2 years on campus is something that we've reaped lots of benefits from.
Dr. Madsen, I want to ask you about the internship. When you select that mentor and you select that student, how hard do you work to make that perfect match? I mean, universities are big, they can be bureaucratic, they can be impersonal. We've talked about that earlier today. How do you get the right feel between two people so that one can learn, one can mentor, and everyone is productive, and at the end of this, a young person has a good head start?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to note that we don't match the student with the employer on campus, if you will. What we try to do is we train up the on-campus employer on what mentoring is, how to develop a project, how to develop an internship out of what it is that you're trying to do. And then we also are facilitating, consulting, and coaching the students on what to look for, what types of questions to ask them to make sure that they get that fit that makes sense for them. So there's a lot of facilitation around those things. And then the matches start to happen because students ultimately are getting experience. Now, at the end of the semester, if they say, oh, I don't want to do research, that's not my thing, they're still understanding those transferables. They're still understanding that that's an experience that I learned something about myself and something that I can take to the next iteration of whatever it is I'm trying to do. So that's kind of where we go.
Dr. McLean, when you're dealing with the students trying to figure out where they are and they get into your career training and this doesn't work out for me or I don't think it's going to work for me, how do you know a student is truly not on the right track with their decision making, and how do you gauge whether a student just doesn't like it because it's tough, but they have the skill that once they mature, they're going to be a star in this particular field of study and in this career line?
So those of us who know student development theory know a theory of challenge and support. So that's very important that students stay as challenged as possible and that we support them through that. So when it gets hard, that's not an excuse for you to kind of pull out and not do it. If it's hard because it's not a good match for your skills, aptitude, strengths, personality, we assess those. We have tools that we use, inventories to assess. We do a strength finder, career interest inventory, MBTI personality inventory, and then they take courses. And by the time all of that comes together, it's clear for them that they either are aligned with all those things have come together or they have not. And then we can begin to have those conversations. Also, a lot of times students get fixated on a major for lots of different reasons. I'm sure you all know this. It's either because somebody told me I should major in that, or 50% of the students who come to NC State want to major in engineering. And so should they all be engineers? No. Some of them are really good at math but not so good at science, are really good at science. So we have to figure all of that out in the process. And we also, when we talk about careers, we don't do that. That's not the first thing we do. We talk about who they are, how they learn, what their interests are, what their skills, strengths are. And then by the time they take the courses and learn about the majors, because most of them don't know. I mean, at NC State, we have 100 majors, and if you count concentrations, there's over 200. That's a lot to select from. They're not aware of those. And so they learn about things as we have majors fairs, and they say, you can actually do that for a living? I'm like, yeah. And so when they learn about those careers, we actually have them entertain a major and a backup as well to get to what it is they want to be doing. And it's a good process. It usually works out well.
Dr. Wooden, hearing all three of you on the panel, four of you, every campus seems to be unique. So a lot of campuses represented out here that may want to share your idea, maybe consider launching it on their campus. How self-aware must that university leader be that this program would fit my campus? Because it sounds like every challenge is different. You don't want to launch a program that's not going to be a good fit for the people attending.
I think our campus was the right size for our program. Sorry about that. I think our campus was the right size for the program that we chose to do. So we have about 3,000 students who are in usually first and second year. So making the resources available to do that worked for us. I don't know if telling the campus with 30,000 students to put all of your freshmen and sophomores into a college is the way to go, because I think direct admit for a number of programs work better that way. Again, paying attention to our student population, we knew and we still know that there are a number of developmental and cultural milestones that our students need to overcome, and work that we have to do with our students that works well for it. So now, for the naysayers who say, well, faculty really should have been doing that advising, now when we look at the retention rates, I think we've converted them. But I also think that we've created some great opportunities for faculty to replicate some of those things and do those things that they do well with students in their junior and senior year. One of the things that we found is that when we transition students, we call it a transition process, from the university college into their major, a number of students will tell their advisors, I'm not going. Because, well, I mean, when you have the professional advisor, there's someone there all day, every day to see you, and you can probably get in during open office hours if you don't have an appointment. But faculty members have classes, they have research assignments, they're traveling, doing research and speaking, and so you kind of get in where you fit in sometimes there. But it works on our campus. I think this is the second time I've been able to be on a panel with Charlotte and NC State, and Charlotte is doing some really great things with their first year students as well as in the career space, and NC State is doing some recent innovations in their university college as well. And so I think that this is a great opportunity for us to come together to share stories, and there are things that we can learn from each other to take back to our campuses to reach that ultimate goal of getting that retention rate that we wanted and getting that graduation rate that we wanted. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of my friends who's sitting and looking at me, Dr. Stitz at Winston-Salem. I was on her campus a few months ago, and I was looking at some of the things that they've done across their general education curriculum and some of the outcomes that they've created. And it's truly innovative and exciting, and so we're probably going to borrow some of that as well. And so I think having different campuses who do things well on their campuses and having the opportunity to share those things is what strengthens us as a university.
Dr. Laude, I'll close with you. We open with you. Your overnight success took several years to achieve. How do you diminish the gap between professor, student? You build that trust and that relationship so that a student looks into your programs or any of these programs and go, these people really do have my interests at heart. I'm going to trust them with my success and work hard because they inspire me.
First, I want to say, wow, North Carolina is a pretty great state. It really is. I love the commitment to higher education that comes across the board, and being able to listen to these variations on programs. I go, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly how to do it from very different institutions. It's a really impressive thing to hear. What most struck me was how thematically consistent all of this was. And on a certain level, it came back to this notion of caring and of a student feeling like they belong. And those are all nice, touchy-feely words, but it gets to the question that you're asking about, I think, on a certain level, in that In many ways, the way higher education has evolved in terms of the relationship between the faculty member and the student, we moved in a direction where that ability for the student to feel that the professor cared and that the student belonged was replaced by this awkward notion of a dark room with a PowerPoint presentation. The faculty don't have to be the advisors or the mentors necessarily for the student to feel that those opportunities are there. But something has to change in terms of the relationship, whether it's the way instruction takes place in a course so that the student feels like they're more connected to the faculty member, or through different kinds of experiential learning opportunities where the faculty member is repositioned. I was going to mention that at UT Austin we have a program called the Freshman Research Initiative, in which half of the students in the College of Natural Sciences are doing research in the laboratories of a research scientist in their first year. That's a much better place for those students to feel like they're connecting to that faculty member and getting that mentoring and that sense of caring than in a dark room with the lights out. I think that we're seeing a time period where technology is changing things, where pedagogical approaches are changing, and where the whole sense of the responsibility to the student is changing, and it positions the faculty member to be in absolutely a great place to make that kind of change.
And with that, we'll conclude the second panel. If I'll turn the microphone back over to the master of ceremonies. How about a round of applause for our panel?
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.